Hi, my name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance. We're the only organization I know of that focuses on outreach and formal practices about engaging people across the enterprise to achieve organizational objectives. And today we're focusing on the overlooked role of worker voice with someone who's been studying this issue for years, professionally and out of personal interest. What role do workers really play in helping us define our organizations and actually, beyond define them, fulfill their purpose? Larry Bieferman, he's an independent consultant and fellow at the Harvard Law School Center for Labor and a Just Economy. And so he'll be sharing a little bit about what he does later on in this show. Finally, I always want to thank our partners, the organizations that we work with to help them achieve their business objectives. And part of what we do for them helps fund what we're doing here today. And then finally, there's all sorts of free resources available to anybody who's interested in implementing a strategic and systematic approach to engagement across enterprise. We believe in stakeholder capitalism. We give away, in a sense, our intellectual property. So take advantage of the free information. And I'm now going to stop sharing this information and welcome Larry Bieferman to the EEA YouTube show. Thank you, Larry. So, Larry, let's get right into it. What do you mean by what do we mean by worker voice? Is it just doing employee surveys and assessment? And what specific forms should it take?
First, I want to thank you for this session because I think it's extremely important and you're, if not unique, distinctive in featuring it. I would say three dimensions. First, I call it's about communications between workers and companies. Okay, workers at or with respect to a company. I say with respect to because you can work with respect to a company but not be an employee, independent contractor in the supply chain. Okay, so the communications between workers who work at the company or have some other kind of relationship with the company, number one. Second, they're communications which have a particular intent or focus, and they range from their communications which are concerned with the actions or decisions of both the company and the workers, and they can take the form of sharing information, providing explanations, engaging in dialogue, consultation, negotiation, or shared decision-making. Those are broad categories. So the communications aimed at different ways of engaging with one another through those communications about particular kinds of subject matter. So that's number one. What forms do they take? Broad categories. There's direct and indirect worker voice. Direct voice is that is there's a direct communications between workers and the company. Indirect is an intermediary. The intermediary might be a union. First category. Second, there's individual or collective voice. That is, the communications are literally by the individual worker, or they're communications which represent the shared communications of a group of workers. And lastly, you might say there's formal voice and informal voice. That is, they can be prescribed systems or formal manners of communicating, but also they're informal matters. Think about chatting next to the water cooler. That's informal communication, it's not structured. So those are sort of the three broad categories. And lastly, subject matter. Again, it runs the gamut. Anything from, on the personal level, issues of respect, discrimination, harassment, conflict resolution, to literally work-related, how work is done, when it is done, how is it best done. Other categories are compensation, benefits, etc., working conditions, health and safety, for example, at a level up, if you will, the nature and quality of the products the company provides. It could reach to the strategic dimension, whether and how a company chooses to use new technologies like AI and its implications for the country and the workers. And at the highest level, and here you're getting into issues of worker ownership or board membership, we get to those later. Again, broad directions for the company, the business strategy and ranges and company values and things like that. So it runs the gamut. Oh,
So what can be the benefits? What should a company expect to get from worker voice?
uh, uh, the company can get lots of things, if you will. I didn't address the particular mechanisms. We can get to them. It ranges from, if you will, the mundane. You can have a safety valve effect. That is, if there is disquiet or something amiss among workers, it's a way for workers to communicate that, just simply to alert companies to that, right? But it's a worker voice as a means for spurring worker engagement, offering a means to connect how they feel and how they see how they're doing work in relation to the company and their willingness and initiative in pursuing that. It can provide, workers are in some ways the hidden eyes and ears of the company. Workers see things that people up higher up the chain don't see. So workers have that experience and they can share that. And depending on the level of the issue, they may have innovative ideas about how things might be done differently. So they can, workers are also a source of innovation. Those are a few examples.
So let me ask you then, and this isn't on the list of questions I sent, but because it's a big oversight on my part, it would seem to me that you're going to do the best with worker voice, and this will get to some of the things you may have wanted to cover in my first question. You're going to get a better result if it's CEO-led and strategic. In other words, if the company literally has a strategic approach to worker voice with the goals of achieving what you've said, higher engagement, greater innovation, an escape valve, all of those good things. So to you've been around a few years. How many companies do you think have a CEO-led strategic approach to worker voice?
My sense is relatively very few. And I think I'll generalize that statement, CEO-led, that in a way that's linked. That was a remark I was going to make, which relates to the potential efficacy of worker voice. In some ways, it can't be bought on the cheap. That is, you have to think systemically. You need to think of where does voice as a system and fit into the larger systems. For that, you need CEO leadership to conceive of and provide direction to formulate that system. It means, though, that system has to be resourced realistically. The company needs to be willing to put in the time to understand how that system operates effectively, just for starters. So that's connected to it being CEO-led. I agree with you.
So in other words, the headline already of this program is, this is a hidden asset. For many organizations, this is an overlooked asset, the collective intelligence of your team and their willingness to share it with you.
Well, it's a collective intelligence. And also, again, you want people to trust the company, to believe in it, to support its mission. Then you have to engage people at a level, most certainly in terms of their ideas and interests, but also how they experience the workplace, what they get out of it in a variety of ways, from career objectives to immediate issues like pay and benefits and what have you. So you have to connect with them, and worker voice is a means for understanding that and then beginning the process of engaging it in one or more of the modalities we talked about.
And you said there were some modalities that you wanted to mention that I hadn't covered, or that I cut you off on.
Well, I'm saying the modalities range from anything from, I said, the mundane from a cup, it goes under the rubric of an open door policy or a suggestion box, to regular surveys, mini surveys or pulse surveys, where you're simply engaging workers individually, and you're simply posing questions and gathering information. But that can range to more structured arrangements, to joint committees, worker company committees, obviously unions, ranging up to issues of board representations, to other worker share ownership and what's called gain sharing, which is a broader range of modalities, importantly linked to linked to voice. So there's a range of means for worker voice. But
So then the number two takeaway, oh, go ahead.
There's one other point I wanted, because it relates in terms of sort of if you're going to make this work, to put it crassly, you got to be real. That is, the system's not going to work unless the company is willing to respond to what they hear. It doesn't mean they have to agree necessarily with what they hear, but they have to anticipate expectation. That is, if you're going to say to workers, yes, I want to hear from you, and I'm willing to engage with you in one or another form, the expectation is that the company will respond in kind with communications commensurate with whatever has been set up.
Okay, just stop right there. Hold on. Because what we're trying to accomplish here is to give people a step-by-step approach. So one, CEO's got to be committed. Number two, got to be baked into the system. In other words,
got to be resourced and managed.
And then, to your point, acted upon. So in other words, we are listening to your voice, and even if we don't agree. And so what do we do if we don't agree?
Well, again, I think that's really context dependent, because again, my guess is that depending on the nature of the relationship, that workers may expect that the companies not to agree, and especially insofar as the company is forthcoming with kind of the supporting rationales, then workers may very well accept that. At the extreme, if they're not, obviously there are dramatic responses like work stoppages, strikes, and other kinds of activities, right? But again, if there are various mechanisms where there can be communications between the company and workers in various ways, they can be resolved. It depends on the particular mechanism.
Well, and this gets to why the purpose of an organization is so important, because if it's clear, then when there are trade-offs, you can help explain, look, companies have to make trade-offs. We as parents, as cousins and aunts and friends have to make trade-offs. But if you have a purpose and you have an ethical basis for them, at least they can be somewhat mitigated. So let's get to the practical terms. It's clear that not many companies are taking advantage of this opportunity. It's clear that there are significant economic benefits, retention, referrals, all of those things. So let's say a CEO is inspired by this, and you don't have to be a big company. In fact, the smaller you are, the easier it is, I would think. What would you suggest somebody do? A CEO who's inspired and goes, yep, I want to bake worker voice into my culture. And the goal of it is to foster a culture of continuous innovation and of having employees watch my back.
Well, I'm not exactly sure because there's a couple. One is, again, looking for others' experiences. Let me take a step back. I mean, there is and I've worked my way through chunks of a vast literature. A lot of it academic, a lot of the commercial literature isn't widely available, if you will, so less studies. So there are case studies and illustrations of what particular things might work. So that, broadly speaking, one can consult. There are distillations of that. I can refer people to examples of that. Second is, again, insofar as depending on the networks the company is involved with, is if there are companies which have more experience with worker voice, obviously drawing on that experience. Beyond that, in some ways, I think it's a matter of what I want to call self-reflection and self-examination. And what do I mean by that? I think sometimes I've suggested that companies do a voice map. That is, go back and say, look at, in the course of the company's operations, what in fact are the ways in which I quote workers speak or attempt to speak to quote the company, A, and B, what are the ways in which the company responds or not? I don't mean substantively, but the forms, right? So at least understanding that. Second is what are the, as far as the company sees it, what are the pressing issues for the company? Whether they have to do anything from quality control to product selection to customer service or what have you, right? Maybe focusing on some of those areas and saying, okay, maybe thinking hard about, well, what might my workers know or be able to say about those experiences which could be helpful to them and helpful to the company. For example, I assume a worker who's engaging customers who are unhappy, getting those terrible phone calls about terrible service or what have you, is not a good experience for them, stressful, all the rest, and not good for the company, right? So, well, might I think then of what's the way in which I can engage by communicating with my workers about their experience? What are the mechanisms that I have, and might I change that? Part of it might be surveys, right? But also be ways of sitting down directly with some of them in small groups, et cetera, and transiently then saying what kinds of ideas there are, and then developing a mechanism to feedback that back to the workers. As I said before, they want to know that their voice is heard. It doesn't have to be agreed with, right? But feedback to the workers what the company understands in light of what they've heard from the workers, and maybe formulate maybe a different approach to, let's say, customer service, which in the first instance is seen as the benefit to workers as well as to the companies. Right.
So really, first look at do an assessment. Okay,
Yeah.
we want and where I know I like that concept of a voice map. How, and I think you can include customers too. How are we getting information, and what are we doing with that information? Is it ad hoc? Is it strategic? Is there technology involved? Are people using the technology? So assessment is really important, it would seem. And then, of course, setting up a system going if there's a gap, right? It's ad hoc. We really don't have a formal system. Then, okay, we better develop a system. And then I think from what you're saying, if you're using worker voice, then involve people. Maybe set up a strategic worker voice task force, representative of different key people who help to develop and manage a worker voice initiative. Do you think that might make sense?
Absolutely. And I want to sort of add an additional thing that, as I mentioned, it's clear, to me at least, from the literature, okay, that you need a system, and the effectiveness of worker voice is the efficacy of worker voice is linked to other aspects of the workplace experience. It's related to whether and how people are trained, what they see their prospects for mobility within the company, right? What are the kinds of benefits they might gain from improvements? So I think when this is the prelude to a system. I wonder whether if you said with a voice map, if it's a great deal of work, I can focus on a few areas that the company sees as important, intuitively or based on some other experience, right? And then see how the operation of worker voice might be linked to other aspects of the worker experience. So, for example, if the dealing with customer service is one of them, right? And if worker rewards who engage in some form of customer service are linked to how they do customer service, then you have to make sure that the system of rewards fits with the kinds of suggestions that workers are going to make. That is, if they don't see any benefit to them of changes, one is let's say the experiential, the personal distress, but maybe if they're rewarded relative to what the character of customer purchases, then you need to think about how your reward system is linked to how voice operates.
So in other words, you have
You have
to
to think
again,
globally, systematically and globally.
and holistically.
Yeah, that's the better word. Yeah.
Look at how, so for instance, make sure that the rewards and recognition are commensurate with the contribution. Otherwise, people after a while that they've received feedback, they've been told, thank you for this, or we're not going to use it. It's not one of our priorities this year. We don't have the resources. It's a great idea, but or it might be, that's a terrific idea. We're going to create a committee for that. And then at some point, somebody feels that they get recognition, and then communication is critical too. Ironically, we have to remind people that they have a voice and how to voice it. So I guess that's another, the system has to include training, communication, reinforcement, recognition, and then of course, measurement, right? Shouldn't the company be looking at, concrete, okay, we initiated this effort to get employee voice. Shouldn't we be looking at what happened a year later, and how did employee engagement go up? Did we get ideas that turned into concrete? So part of the system should be measurement, shouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I said there's a plethora of studies, thousands of studies, some sets out which may touch upon a worker voice, and the dependent variables, the outcomes vary from levels of work satisfaction, worker engagement, productivity, et cetera. So you have to sort of think about what measures are meaningful. Again, you have to be a little bit careful because a multiplicity of factors interact to produce the ultimate result. Linking the particular outcome to the worker voice piece is a little bit tricky, right? So, for example, but you might want to look at, again, so the causally linked, the closely linked impacts first of the worker voice, and that can be, again, simply a, let's say, I'm thinking of the customer service example, some question that relates to job satisfaction, someone playing that role, that's most immediate. You want to, then ultimately that transforms hopefully into better performance, if you will. So you can have immediate measures and more indirect measures.
And teaching moments that help, in a sense, enhance future performance. So it's interesting here then, we've got to have, again, support, system, communication, reinforcement, measurement.
And he had one other point, 30 seconds. And again, it depends on how large the organization is, but it's clear from the literature that if you have a relatively large organization with levels of hierarchy, it gets very tricky with regard to the middle and lower managerial, because depending on whether the two things, that many dimensions of aspects of worker voice are translated by the middle and lower management. They're the ones who deal with it on a day-to-day level. Whether they're willing and capable to do it is a very tricky question, and there's some potential tensions between, let's say, worker aspirations and communicating with management higher up with regard to issues, and middle and lower management. I said, depends on the size of the organization, but that, my sense is also a very important thing to think of. You've got to prepare and support lower management, if you will, to support that and implement that system.
Well, that's great point. Thank you so much. It has to be part of their ongoing training, their ongoing coaching, just like. And then, of course, many companies can facilitate this with technology, as you know. It's easy to have an electronic suggestion box system, innovation system, and to link it with your communications platform. But Larry, once again, the technology is only a tool. The stethoscope has no use unless a doctor puts it, or a nurse puts it against your chest and listens and knows what to listen for. So we always have to remind people, don't put in the technology unless you're going to put in a system. And I don't know how AI is going to replace that quite yet. It may find a way, but I think we have a way to go on that one.
I agree with you. And I was originally a physicist, so I come from a scientific technological background. But let's put it, folks get a little too caught up with the technological miracles and don't think about the underlying social and other substance that behind them, particularly in these contexts. So one can be carried away by all the benefits of of all kinds of data analytics and so on. But unless you have an understanding of the people in your organization and how it really operates, my belief is that data is only going to get you so far.
Well, and you know what? This is what comes from yours and my experience. We've seen all the hype. How much hype have we seen that the world was going to be transformed by something in our lifetimes, and we're still here. The internet was going to transform everything. Everything, in the unemployment rate in the United States is 3.3%. So, but whatever. Well, anyway, let me ask you quickly. We have a few more minutes here.
Yeah.
Unions, thanks to you on June 6th, we're going to have a terrific session, really talking a constructive, not the old talk about unions, but the constructive talk about unions. What role can unions play? And we're going to talk about the role of unions at companies that believe that people are assets and that people are valued and that they don't want to have an adversarial relationship with the union. If they're going to have a union, they want to have a partnership. Can unions play a role in in worker voice?
Well, of course, unions are a particular form of worker voice.
But I mean, I'm sorry, great point, but in a constructive way, not just give me more, or we need more, or this or that, but hey, how can we work together to develop maybe a gain sharing program where we improve quality and productivity, employees gain? In other words, have you seen or do you believe that unions can be partners with management in gaining worker engagement and voice, rather than simply the old model of anger?
Well, I think it's a chicken and egg issue. I know on the certainly I see on the company side of the equation a jaundiced view of what unions are and what they might do, and certainly there is substance to some of the concerns and fears. And on the union side, and our program has had links with major unions, the Harvard program. So I met lots of folks, and again, on their side, particularly in the context of conflict and strikes and other efforts, the rhetoric gets carried away, and the oppositional lose-lose attitude certainly can prevail. And in a way, part of the larger game here, and maybe this is part of the larger conversation we'll pick up with Tom Kochen next week, is trying to walk into the conversation a bit differently, both on the company side and otherwise. That is, there are anything from in the buildings trades, the apprenticeship programs, and other programs that support the unionized aspects of the trade, to the Kaiser Permanente experiment running for years in terms of company health worker collaboration. There are lots of examples of constructive union company collaboration, and moreover, in certain respects, unions solve certain problems that can help companies avoid dealing with certain problems, insofar as there are certain interworker conflicts or tensions. The union, is a collective body representing groups of them, is there to resolve them. I've seen it myself in terms of some of the work I've done in connection with unions. Company doesn't have to deal with it, if you will. So
well, we're going to talk about this next week.
Yeah. So there are I think there are constructive models. The question is, how do we move? It's a psychological and social question to a more constructive conversation, because there's a lot of knee-jerk stuff.
Well, trust is the number one word that is lacking. Trust. Collaborative, and I think, and we'll discuss this at length, but one would say that in the era of stakeholder capitalists, we need to have trust that the unions are going to help us to achieve a common purpose that raises the tide for all stakeholders, right? And so that turns the union into a partner to help achieve that, in which everybody shares in the benefit. To grow the pie, as Alex Edmonds likes to say, who wrote that book. So in terms of our session today, it seems that we've done a pretty darn good job of mapping out the economic benefits, defining the multiple modalities of worker voice, but that because of that, we really need to have a system. To have a system, the CEO must be committed. We have to bake it into our system, and we should probably start by maybe naming a committee, if it's a big enough company, representing different of the constituencies and developing and recommending a system that is baked into the modalities and that addresses the issue of lower level management that is so critical, that recognizes that this is a holistic process, that you have to look at all the interactions of stakeholders and things that engage them, the whole workplace experience, as you said. That the unions can play a constructive role if we build trust into it. That there, again, people need to know about all the different modalities. Is there anything that I left out of this kind of summary, Larry, to give somebody some ammunition to go back to management with?
No, I think you pretty much captured it. I would leave it at that. Yeah.
Well, if I haven't, we're going to publish with this article a link to a comprehensive paper that has lots of sources and resources. So those of you who really want to address this issue and really look at some of the research, the article that we're going to publish and this YouTube show will include a link to that. So Larry, we look forward to seeing you next week on this exciting topic of unions. And again, it's going to be a positive, constructive discussion because unions still, cover 10% of American workers at some of the world's leading companies. So it's a very important subject. So once again, Larry Bieferman. Oh, I did want to have you tell us in 1 minute, what does your organization do?
The Center for Labor and Economic Justice is part of the is located at Harvard Law School. It used to be called the Labor and Work-Life Program, and actually has its origins in the Harvard Trade Union Program, which was the first and still continuing executive leadership training programs, which started and operated at the Harvard Business School, probably for decades. It's a research
union leaders.
Exactly. It's like people go to be trained to be on corporate managers, to be board members. This helped provide a range of experience and training for emerging union leaders. That's what it was about, and is still about. And then that program ultimately moved to the law school and morphed into the Labor and Work-Life Program, now called the Center for Labor and a Just Economy. It's a research and policy center for bringing together, actually, certainly union folks, but also a variety of actors and companies and unions and workers, depending on the circumstances, and offering ideas both in terms of law and practice about certainly well-being for workers, but also success for companies as well.
Well, that's great. And it's going to be very relevant to talking next week. Thanks again. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And see you next week.
Thanks a lot.